here's the final project for the class. Once you open it up, you'll take a look here. There's information about the data set. This is data from individuals, medical patients. You can read the introduction there. There's a link here that would open up the data set. And so the data set will look like this, the one you're going to be using to analyze. We'll talk about that on a separate video about kind of how to manage some of this data using Google Sheets. What you will see here is a description of the variables in the data set. So you have the name, and then, of course, the description of what it is. From this data, right, important is here, of course, is explanatory variables, response variables, but most specifically in this data set, we're interested in this idea of heart attacks and which of these variables could play a role in a heart attack. But, of course, there's other relationships between these variables: height, weight, blood pressure, weight, maybe cholesterol level, smoking, right, exercise. All these are variables, and it's just really thinking about which one explains which, and which ones are related, are there associations and correlations. So specifically for this project, you have part 1, which is just answering these questions about the data. So make sure you would go through that. And these questions are specifically about these variables here from the data set. So that's what you would use. And then you would also use information here to infer your answers to these questions. Part 2 is open-ended, that you will be forming your own questions from the data set. Which research questions? And I've given some examples here, as you can look at. Different types. I didn't tell you the types. You may know that by now. You can identify which type of test would be required to answer these research questions. These are, again, made-up research questions about other aspects of the world, but samples of research questions. And what you need to come up with for this section, part 2, is a research question that can be answered or asked about this data for a 2-proportion z-test. What's the research question? What are the related variables in your research question? And then what would the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis be in that situation? And you'll do that for a 2-sample t-test, for a chi-square test for independence, an ANOVA, and then a linear regression t-test for the slope. So you'll come up with your own questions from these variables, identify the variables after the question, and then, of course, what would the null and alternative hypothesis be in those situations? So that's part 2. Part 3, you're going to actually answer these specific questions, identify the parameter and state the appropriate hypothesis, name the procedure, and then do it using technology. You can do it by hand. Some of you do stuff by hand, but ArtiStat can answer all of these questions for us. Answer this question, come up with your conclusion. For the first application. Application 2, there's another question here. You answer it using the steps. And then application 3 is that you pick one of these methods, linear regression or chi-square for test for independence, and then you actually, again, identify the variables here. You don't have to run the hypothesis test. I just want you to create the graphical summary. So you're not running the test here for application 3 here. You're not running the test. You're just creating the graphs and any statistics you would need to come up with a conclusion. You don't have to run the test. You're just going to use the graphical representations or the statistics that you calculate to answer the relationship between your variables that you're choosing. So that's important. Okay, choose one of those and the variables and what relationship or question are you exploring. And then you will reflect on your practices here. That's part 4. Again, answering these questions. You just go through and answer these questions. The first one is about select an application for part 1 or 2. So your questions you're answering are about, applications 1 or 2 from that. Okay. And then lastly, again, choosing one of these applications from App 1 or App 2 for Part 3. And then if you want extra credit, playing doctor, I've given you 2 patients, and then here's their data, and then you make a prediction. Do you think they're high risk for heart attack, or even the idea have they had a heart attack or not, based on the data that we have here? And then you give an answer, and then give us an explanation. Give me an explanation for your answer, right, based on the explanatory variables that led you to your conclusion. And that's the project.